Hello, friends. We are back with episode 194 of the Our Weekly Highlights podcast. If you're new, this is the weekly podcast where we talk about the excellent highlights and additional resources that are shared every single week at ourweekly.org. My name is Eric Nance, and I'm delighted you join us from wherever you are around the world. And I'm always joined, it is February, but it's still my same co-host, and that's my choice here, Mike Thomas. Mike, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty well, Eric. It was kind of a long January here in the U.S., and it seems like we're in for an even longer February. But happy to be on the highlights today, and may your data sets continue to be available.
Let's certainly hope so. I will say on Saturday, I had a good little diversion from all this stuff happening. I was with about 70,000 very enthusiastic fans at WWE's Royal Rumble right here in the Midwest, and that was a fun time. My voice has finally come back. Lots of fun surprises, some not so fun surprises, but that's why we go to these things so we can voice our pleasure or displeasure depending on the storyline. But it was an awesome time. I've never been to what the WWE has as their quote-unquote premium events. They used to be called pay-per-views at a stadium as big as our Lucas Oil Stadium here in Indianapolis. So I had a great time, and I'm slowly coming back to the real world now. But it was well worth the price of admission.
That is super cool. That must have been an awesome experience. Lucas Oil Stadium, a dome?
It is. Yep, that's the home of
good.
the Indianapolis Colts. It's been around for about 15 years, I believe now. Last time I was there, I was at a Final Four, our NCAA basketball tournament, way back when, where we saw my one of my favorite college basketball teams, Michigan State, unfortunately lose the Butler that year. But it was a good time nonetheless. So we won't be laying the smackdown on R for this. We're gonna put over R, as they say in the business, and that is an emphatic yeet, if you know what I mean. Yeet. But speaking of enthusiastic, I am very excited that this week's issue is the very first issue curated by our newest member of the Our Weekly team, Jonathan Kitt. Welcome, Jonathan. We are so happy to have you on board the team. And as always, just like all of us at our first time of curation, it's a lot to learn, but he had tremendous help from our fellow Our Wiki team members and contributors like all of you around the world with your pull requests and suggestions. And Jonathan did a spectacular job with his first issue. So we're going to dive right into it with arguably still one of the hottest topics in the world of data science and elsewhere in tech. And that is, how in the world can we leverage the newer large language models, especially in our R and data science and development workflows? We have sung the praises of recent advancements on the R side of things, i.e. with Hadley Wickham's Elmer package, which I've had some experience with, and now we're starting to see kind of an ecosystem start to spin up around this foundational package for setting up those connections to hosted or even self-hosted large language models and APIs. And in particular, one of his fellow Posit software engineers, Simon Couch from the Tidy Models team, he had the pleasure of enrolling in one of Posit's internal AI hackathons that were being held last year. And he learned about some, the Elmer package and Shiny Chat along with others for the first time. And he saw tremendous potential in how this can be used across different realms of his workflows. Case in point, it is about twice a year that the Posit team, or the Tidyverse team, I should say, undergoes spring cleaning of their code base. Now, what does this really mean? Well, you can think of it a lot of ways, but in short, it may be updating some code that the packages is using. Maybe it's using an outdated dependency or a deprecated function from another package, and here comes the exercise of making sure that's up to date with, say, the newest, blessed versions of that said function and whatnot, such as the CLI package having a more robust version of the abort functionality when you want to throw an error in your function, as opposed to what Erlang was exposing in years before. It's one thing if you only have a few files to replace, right? With that stop syntax or abort syntax from rlang. Imagine if you have hundreds of those instances, and imagine if it's not always so straightforward as that find and replace that you might do in an IDE such as RStudio or Positron. Well, that's where Simon, as a result of participating in this hackathon, he created a prototype package called CLI-PAL, which will let you highlight certain sections of your R script in RStudio and then run an add-in function call to convert that to like a newer syntax. And in this case, that abort syntax going from rlang to the CLI packages version of that. The proof of concept worked great, but it was obviously a very specific case. Yet he saw tremendous potential here, so much so that he has spun up not one, not two, but 3 new packages, all wrapping the Elmer functionality combined with some interesting integrations with the RStudio API package to give that within editor type of context to these different packages. So I'll lead off Simon's summary here on where the state is on each of these packages with the first true successor to CLI-PAL, which was called PAL. This comes with built-in prompts, if you will, that are tailored to the developer, i.e. the package developer. If you think of the more common things that we do in package development, it's, building unit tests or doing our oxygen documentation or having robust messaging via the CLI package. Those are just a few things. But PAL was constructed to have that additional context of the package and i.e. the functions you're developing in that package, so that you could say, highlight a snippet and say, give me the R oxygen documentation already filled out with that function that you're highlighting. That's just one example. You could also, like I said, build in like CLI calls or convert those CLI calls from other calls if you want to do aborts or messages or warnings and whatnot. And that already has saved him immense amount of time with his package development, especially in the spring cleaning exercise. He does have plans to put PAL on CRAN in the coming weeks, but he saw tremendous potential here. That's not all. Mike, he didn't want to stop there with PAL because there were some other interesting use cases that may not always fit in that specific package development workflow or the type of assumptions that PAL gives us. So why don't you walk us through those?
Yeah, so there's 2 more that I'll walk through, and one is more on the package development side, and then one is more on the analysis side for day-to-day R users and not necessarily package developers. So the first of which is called Ensure, ENSURE. And one of the interesting things about Ensure is that it actually does a couple of different things that PAL does not do. And PAL sort of assumes that all of the context that you need is in the selection and the prompt that you provide it. But when we think about, in the example that Simon gives here, writing unit tests, it's actually really important to have additional pieces of context that may not be in just the single file that you're looking at, the prompt that you're writing, or the highlighted selection that you've chosen. You may actually need to have access to package data sets, right? That you'll need to include in that unit test that maybe aren't necessarily in the script or the snippet of code that you're focusing on at the moment. So Ensure, goes beyond the context that you have highlighted or is showing on screen, and actually sort of looks at the larger universe, I believe, of all of these scripts and items that are included in your package. And it looks like, unit testing here is probably the biggest use case for Ensure, in that you can leverage a particular function, like a .r function within your R directory. And if you want to scaffold or really create, I guess, a unit test for that, it's as easy, I believe, as highlighting the text or highlighting the lines of code that you're looking to write a unit test for, and just a hotkey shortcut that will actually spin up a brand new test dash whatever, test that file. It'll stick that file in the appropriate location under, test that for those of us that are our package developers out there. And it will start to write those unit tests on screen for you in that test that file. And there's a nice little GIF here that shows sort of the user experience, and it's pretty incredible that we have the ability to do that, and it looks really, really cool. So I think that's really the main goal of the Ensure package. And then the last one I want to touch on is called Gander, and again, I think this one is a little bit more day-to-day data analysis friendly. The functionality here is that you are able to highlight a specific snippet of text, or it also looks like Simon mentions that you can also not highlight anything, and it'll actually take a look at all of the code that is in the script that you currently have open. And you, by pressing a quick keyboard shortcut, it looks like you can leverage this add-in, which will pop up sort of like a modal that will allow you to enter a prompt. And in this example, there's a data set on screen. Simon just highlights the name of that data set. I think it's the Stack Overflow data set, but it's just like Iris or Gapminder. And he highlights it, the modal pops up, and he says, create a scatter plot, right? And all of a sudden, the selection on screen is replaced by ggplot code that's going to create this scatter plot. And he can continue to do that and iterate on the code by saying, jitter the points, or, make the x-axis formatted in dollars, things like that. And it's really, really cool how quickly he is able to really create this customized ggplot with formatting, with faceting, all sorts of types of different things in a way that is obviously much quicker and more efficient, even if you are having to do some minor tweaks to what the LLM is going to return at the end of the day, than if you were going to just completely write it from scratch. So pretty incredible here. There's another GIF that goes along with it demonstrating this. It looks like not only in this pop-up window is there an input for the prompt that you want to give it, but there is also another option called interface, which I believe allows you to control whether you want to replace the code that you've highlighted, or I would imagine whether you want to add on to the code that you've highlighted instead of just replacing it, if you want to create sort of a new line with the output of the LLM. So really cool couple of packages here that are definitely creative ways to leverage this new large language model technology to try to use, provide us with some AI assisted coding tools. So big thanks to Simon and the team for developing these, and sort of the creativity that they're having around leveraging these LLMs to help us in our day-to-day workflows.
Yeah, I see immense potential here, and the fact that with these being native R solutions inside our R sessions, grabbing the context, not just potentially from that snippet highlighted, but the other files in that given project, whether a package or a data science type project, with the information on the data sets themselves. Like, that is immense value without you having to really, in a separate window or browser, as say ChatGPT or whatnot, trying to give it all the context you can shake a stick at and hope that it gets it. Not always the case. So there is a lot of interesting extensions here that, again, are made possible by Elmer. And, like I said, immense potential here. Simon is quick to stress that these are still experimental. He sees, obviously, some great advantages to this paradigm of literally the bot, if you will, that you're interacting with is injecting directly into your R file that you're writing at the time. Again, that's a good thing. It may sometimes be not so a good thing if it is going on a hallucination or something, perhaps, we don't know. So my tip here is, if you're going to do this day to day, if you're not using version control, you really should, in case it goes completely nuts on you. You don't want that in your commit history and somebody asking you in a code review, what on earth are you thinking there? Oh, it wasn't me. Really? Well, it kind of was when you're using the bot anyway. But nonetheless, having version control, I think, is a must here. But I do see Simon's point that other frameworks in this space, he mentions it kind of in the middle of the post, are leveraging more general kind of backends to interacting with your IDE or your development environment, where maybe not so much it injects that new stuff right away as like a paste, but does more of a Git-like functionality of showing you the difference between what you had before and what you have now after the AI injection. So you could review that kind of quick before you say, I like it. Yeah, let's get it in. Or, yeah, not so much. I want to get that stuff out of here and try again. So I would imagine, again, this is Eric putting on speculation hat here, with the advancements in positron and leveraging more general, VS Code ecosystem, extension ecosystem, that there might be even a more robust way to do this down the road on that side of it. But the advantage of the RStudio API package he's leveraging is that thanks to some shims that have been created on the positron side, this works in both the classic RStudio and in positron. And I think that's, again, tremendous value at this early stage for those that are, preferring, say, RStudio as of now over positron, but still giving flexibility for those that want to stay on the bleeding edge to leverage this tech as well. So I think there's a lot to watch in this space, and Simon definitely does a tremendous job with these packages at this early stage.
That's for sure. Yeah, I appreciate sort of the Posit team's attention to UX because, again, I think that's sort of the most important thing here as we bring in, tools that create very different workflows than maybe what we're necessarily used to. I think it's important that we meet developers and data analysts and data scientists, in the best place possible.
And I mentioned at the outset that Simon is part of the Tidy Models ecosystem team. I will put some quick plugs in the show notes because he is writing a new book called Efficient Machine Learning with R that he first announced at the R Pharma conference last year with an excellent talk. So he's been really knee deep into figuring out the best ways to optimize his development, both from a code writing perspective and from an execution perspective in the Tidy Models ecosystem. So Simon, I hope you get some sleep, man, because you're doing a lot of awesome work in this space.
I was thinking the same thing. I don't know how he does it.
And speaking of someone else that we wonder how on earth did they pull this off with the time they have, our next highlight is, you might say, revisiting a very influential data set that made a tremendous waves in the data storytelling and visualization space, but with one of the new Quartal tools to make it happen. And longtime contributor to our weekly highlights, Nicola Rini, is back again on the highlights, as she has drafted her first use of the close read Quartal extension applied to the Hans Rosling famous Gapminder dataset visualization. If you didn't see, or I should say, if you didn't hear our previous year's highlights, we did cover the close read Quartal extension that was released by Andrew Bray and James Goldie. In fact, there was a talk about this at the aforementioned PositConf last year, which we'll link to in the show notes. But close read, in a nutshell, gives you a way to have that interactive, what you might call scrolly telling, kind of enhanced web-based reading of a report, visualizations, interactive visualizations. You've seen this crop up from time to time from, say, the New York Times blog that relates to data science, other reporting companies out there or startups out there have leveraged similar interactive visualizations. Heck, I even had an article on ESPN, of all things, that was using this kind of approach. So it's used everywhere now. But now, us adopters of Quartal, we can leverage this without having to reinvent the wheel in terms of all the HTML styling and other fancy enhancements we have to make. This close read extension makes all of it happen free of charge. So what exactly is this tremendous report that Nicola has drafted here? She calls it Gapminder, How the World Has Changed. And right off the bat, on the cover of this report is basically a replica of the famous animation visualization plotting the GDP, or gross domestic product per capita, with life expectancy on the y-axis, with the size of the bubbles pertaining to the area around those, and for each country represented there. So once you start scrolling the page, and again, we're an audio podcast, right? We're going to do the best we can with this. She walks through those different components. First with the GDP with some nice, looks like line plots that are faceted by the different regions of the world, getting more details on gross domestic product, and then getting to how that also is affected by population growth. Again, another key parameter in this life expectancy calculation, which gets to the life expectancy side of it. And as you're scrolling through it, the plot neatly transitions as you navigate to that new text on the left sidebar. It is silky smooth, just really, really top-notch user experience here. And then she isolates what one of these years looks like. She calls it the world in 2007, showing that kind of quadrant, that 4-quadrant section you have when you look at low versus high GDP and low versus high life expectancy. And as she's walking through this plot, she's able to zoom in on each of these quadrants as you're scrolling through it to look at, like it said, these 4 different areas. And that's leveraging the same visualization. It's just using these clever tricks to isolate these different parts of the plot. Again, silky smooth. This is really, really interesting to see how she walks through those 4 different areas, and then closing out with the animation once again that goes for each year from the 1950s all the way to the early 2000s, with, again, links to all of her code, GitHub repository, and whatnot. But for a first pass at Close to Read, this is a top-notch product, if I dare say so myself. And boy, oh boy, I am really interested in trying this out. There was actually a Close Read contest that was put together by Posit late last year, and I believe the submissions closed in January this past month. But if you want to see how others are doing in this space, in addition to Nicola's visualization here, we'll have a link in the show notes to Posit community, all the posts that are tagged with this Close Read contest, so you can kind of see what other people are doing in this space. And maybe we'll hear about the winners later on. But this one will have a good chance of winning, if I dare say so myself. So I am super impressed with Close Read here, and Nicola is very quick learning of it.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And I was going through the Quarto document that sort of lives behind this, and it actually seems pretty easy to get up to speed with this scrolly telling concept. It's pretty incredible. I think there's a couple different specific tags that allow you to do this, or maybe to do it easy. It looks like there is a dot scale to fill tag that I believe probably handles a lot of the zoom in, zoom out, sort of the aspect ratio of the plots or GIFs in Nicola's case that are being put on screen, because in her visualization, it's almost like there's this whole left-hand side bar, right, that has a lot of the context and the narrative text that goes along with the visuals on the right side of the screen. Some of the pretty incredible things that I thought were interesting here is, not only was she able to fit a lot of these plots in a nice aspect ratio on the right side of the screen, but there's also actually a section of this scrolly telling visualization where she zooms in across 4 different slides, if you will, on 4 different quadrants of the same plot to tell the story of these 4 different quadrants, one being low GDP per capita and low life expectancy, low GDP per capita and high life expectancy, and the other 2 as well, vice versa. And it's pretty easy. It's pretty awesome, I guess, how the visualization sort of nicely slides from one quadrant to the other as you scroll to the next slide, if you will. So this is for any of the data viz folks out there, data journalism folks out there, I imagine that in order to accomplish something like this in the past, it was probably a lot of D3, JS type of work, and the end product here compared to the Quarto code that I'm looking at it's pretty incredible. And it just sort of gives me the idea that a lot of the heavy lifting has been done for us in the ability to create these Quarto-based scrolly telling types of visualizations. So I'm super excited about this.
You know, it made me go bend the Wayback Machine a little bit on this. I'm going to bring Shiny in this because I love to bring Shiny in almost all my conversations. But back in 2020, of all things, I remember I had the good fortune of presenting at the poster session at the conference. And my topic was kind of highlighting the latest innovations in the Shiny community. And I was trying to push for what could we ever have something like a Shinyverse or whatnot of these community extensions. And to do this poster, I didn't want to just do, PowerPoint or anything. Come on now, you know me. But I leveraged our good friend John Cohen's. He had a development package way back in the day called Full Page, which was a way to create kind of a Shiny app that had these scrolly telling like elements. But I will say he was probably too far ahead of his time on that. I won't say it was that easy to use. And frankly, he would probably acknowledge that too. Here's my idea. I still have the GitHub repo of this, poster I did. I would love to have my hand in converting that to close read and, wait for it, somehow embedding a Shiny Live app inside of it. Can it be done?
I think it can too. I think you'd be breaking some new ground, Eric. But if anybody's up for that challenge, I know it's you.
How did I just nerd snipe myself? Like, how does that happen, Mike? What? You must be hypnotizing me or something without even saying anything. I have no idea.
Peer pressure.
Now, you may be wondering out there, the Gapminder data, we are fortunate that we have a great R package that literally gives us this kind of data. So once Nicola has this package loaded, she's able to, create this awesome close read, scrolly telling type of report. Well, there are many, many other sources of data that can surface this very similar important domain, such as what we saw in the Gapminder set. And you may be wondering, where can I get my hands on some additional data like this so I can do my own, reporting, maybe with close read or Shiny or Quarto, whatever have you. Our last highlight is giving you another terrific resource of data for these kind of situations. This last highlight comes to us from Kenneth Tay, who is a applied researcher at LinkedIn, and he has a blog that he is his latest post is talking about some recent advancements in this portal called Our World in Data, which I have not seen before this highlight, but it is I believe a nonprofit organization whose mission is to create accessible research data to make progress against the world's largest problems. So you might think of, say, poverty, life expectancy, some of the other issues that, say, the Gapminder set highlighted, but they want to make sure that anybody that has the desire and the skill set to use, say, a language like R or whatever else to produce visualizations, to really start to summarize and explore these data, that there is as less friction as possible to access these. And yes, you could access their portal, you could download the data manually on their website, but it was earlier in 2024 that this group had exposed an API to access these data. So Kenneth, in his blog post here, walks through what it's like to use this new API. Particularly, they call it a public chart API because it is the basis for, I believe, some interactive visualizations that their web portal is exposing here. But because there is an API now, he brings back a little bit of old school flavor here, the HTTR or the hitter package. That was one of those cases where I've been spelling it out all this time, but on hitter 2, the README, Hadley literally says how it's pronounced. So thank you, Hadley.
Yes.
I wish all our package authors would do that.
case the baseball player didn't give it away.
Exactly. So great hex on the new package itself. So back to Kenneth's exploration here. He shows us how, with the old school header, along with a little tidyverse magic and JSON Lite loaded into the session, he needs all three of those because, first, it's one thing to access the data itself, which apparently are exposed as CSV files on the back end, but the API lets you grab these directly. But the metadata comes to that in JSON format. So he wants to use JSON Lite to help massage some of that too. So the first exploration of this and the snippet on the blog post is looking at the average monthly surface temperature around the world. So once he's got the URL of the data set, then he assembles the query parameters, which, again, in the world of APIs, you might have some really, really robust documentation. Maybe some other times you have to kind of guess along the way. It's kind of roll the dice, isn't it?
Yeah, I find the latter to be the case more often, especially in professional settings, unfortunately, which seems to make no sense.
Who would ever think that? But yet, I feel seen when you say that. Yes, even as of this past week. My goodness, don't get me started. So, luckily for this, there is a healthy mix here, I would say. So he's got some query parameters. So look at the version of the API, the type of CSV to return, which can be the full set or a filter set, which I'll get to in a little bit, and whether to use long or short column names in the data set that's returned back. And then also, he does a similar thing for the metadata. That's another GET request as well. And then he brings that content directly with JSON format. So the metadata comes back as a list, because most of the time when you return JSON back, it is basically a big nested list. And that gives some high-level information on the data set that he's returning. So you get basically a list with each character string of the variable name and the description of that variable. So that's great. Now the data directly, again, setting up the query parameters. This time he's going to demonstrate what it's like to bring a filtered version of that data right off the bat. And that is where there's a little guessing on that, because he went through the web portal of this, played with the interactive filters that this web portal gives him, and looked at the end of the URL. So if you're new to the way requests are made for API, you might say GET request, where you're trying to grab something from the API. More often than not, you'll attach different flags or different variables at the end of the URL, often in like key value type pairs with an ampersand separating the different parameters. So once he explored this web portal, he was able to grok that, oh yeah, there is a parameter for selecting a country. So I'm going to put that in the query parameter and feed it in the direct value. And then once he does the GET request on that, this is important here, the content, I should say, that's coming back can usually be three different types of flavors. The raw, might say binary representation of that value, the textual value of it, or the formatted JSON or XML version of it. In this case, that it was a text value coming back, because it's literally the CSV contents, as if you just had the CSV open on a new file in your computer. That's how the text is coming back. So he feeds that into a read_CSV directly, and lo and behold, you got yourself a tidy data set as a result of that. So, and then with that, he just did a simple plot of the time in year versus the temperature of the surface across the USA, just to show that that's exactly how you would bring that data in. And there's a lot more you can do with this type of data. But again, it's a good example of, first, going to the documentation where it's available. But then when things maybe aren't as well documented, yeah, nothing beats a little trial and error, right? Sometimes that's the best bet we get. And that's how he was able to do that filtered data set pull. But nonetheless, if you're looking for inspiration on looking at similar data as we covered in the second highlight, but across a wide range of world-specific type of data, I think this portal has a lot of potential. And yes, R is your friend, again, with grabbing these data from almost any source you can imagine. So really great blog post, straight to the point. You could take this code and run with it today. And in fact, a good exercise would be, what would you do to convert that to the header to syntax, which shouldn't be too much trouble. But nonetheless, you've got a great example to base your explorations off of here.
Yeah, I think it's just a good reminder in general, especially for junior data science folks who are just starting out, that your data isn't always going to be in a CSV format. Yes, I know that Our World in Data allows you to export that, but a question that you should be asking, in order to try to automate things as much as possible for yourself is often, is there an API, right, for this data set, or is there an underlying database that we can connect to, so that I can just run my code directly against that, run my script with one click, as opposed to having to go someplace and download the data to a CSV first before I do my analysis. So, if you can sort of automate a recurring script that you have against data that might be just updating, but in the same schema on some particular basis, I think this is a fantastic example of leveraging Our World in Data's API to do that. Some really nice base plotting, some really nice GG plotting as well. A pretty cool mix here that's been put together. And like you said, Eric, a great example of dealing with what's called a GET request, which is where you're actually just modifying the suffix of the URL in order to filter the data set that's going to get returned here. So it's a really great example of doing that with a couple of different parameters that are being managed. I guess one parameter being tab equals chart, another one specifying the time or the date range that we're looking to get data back within, and then the last one being the two countries here in the case of this last example, where we're plotting the average monthly temperature for the entire world, and then for Thailand as well. So, two items in the legend here. As you said, great walkthrough blog post of using a publicly available API to wrangle some data and make it pretty.
Yeah, the limit's only your imagination at this point. So like I said earlier, you could take what Nicola made with her close read example, apply it to this kind of data, and go to town with a great learning journey. Great for a blog post such as this. Again, maybe like you said, speaking to the data scientists out there that are looking to get into an industry or a data science type of role, it never hurts if you've got the time and the energy to build a portfolio of things like this, because you never know just how useful that will be as you're trying to showcase what you find and what skill set you have to generate insights from data like this. Because not to pull the old back in my day syntax here, but we didn't have access to these type of data when I was looking for a job earlier. So take advantage of it, folks. It is here for the taking. Speaking of what else you need to take advantage of, you need to take advantage of our weekly, folks, because if this isn't bookmarked for reading every single week, you are missing out, because this issue has well more than what we just talked about here in these highlights. We got a great batch of additional tutorials, new packages that have been released, new events coming up. It's the full gamut. So we'll take a couple minutes for our additional finds here. And leveraging what we talked about at the outset of the show with Simon's explorations of interacting with Elmer, a very common problem across many, many different industries and organizations is dealing with data that, I'm going to go on a limb here, is kind of trapped in image or PDF format. Because whether you like it or not, there's going to be some team out there that said, you know what? We have this great set of data here, and they act like everything is perfect access. And then you as a data scientist says, oh yeah, where are the CSVs? Where are the Parquet files if they were really up to date? Oh, no, they're in these PDFs. Oh gosh, okay, what do I do now? Yes, there are things like OCR that can help you to an extent, but with the advent of AI, there might be an even easier way to do that. So frequent contributor to our weekly highlights and elsewhere, Albert Rapp, has another post in his 3-Minute Wednesday series on how he was able to leverage Elmer to extract text from both an image file of an invoice as well as a PDF version of that image, and to be able to grab certain numeric quantities like number of billable hours, time period, and whatnot. I think this is a very relatable issue that, again, many organizations, big or small, are going to have to deal with at some point. And I've seen projects being spun up at the hashtag day job where they're looking at ways of building this from scratch. Well, if you're an R user, maybe Elmer with its image extraction functionality might get you 90% of the way there. Hashtag just saying. So excellent post, Albert, and I may be leveraging this sooner than later.
No, that's awesome. And we have some projects that are doing the same thing with some of these self-hosted open weights models to be able to take a look at a PDF and extract very particular pieces of information that we want from it, and we can tell it, give us that back in JSON form, and it allows us to, leverage it downstream. Of course, you have to build a bunch of guardrails around that to make sure it's not hallucinating because it's a black box. But it's pretty powerful stuff, and the accuracy that we're seeing is pretty shocking, pretty awesome. That what I want to call out is an article by the USGS, which is the U.S. Geological Survey, on mapping water insecurity in R with tidy census. They just always do an absolutely beautiful job with data visualization. All the code is here for a lot of these visuals actually deal with households that were lacking plumbing in 2022 in the U.S. and then changes via, I guess, barbell plots, they're called. I don't know if there's any other names for them. Lollipop plots.
Yeah, I've seen them thrown around interchangeably,
Yep, to take a look at improvements in plumbing facilities, particularly in New Mexico and Arizona, which were the two states based upon the 2022 census that I think had the lowest rates of household plumbing. So it's, it may be a niche topic for some, for lack of a better word, but the data visualizations that they have here on these chloropleth maps are really, really nice. I love the color palettes that they use. I really love the walkthrough that they provide on the website in terms of the code and the narrative around how they made the decisions that they made to go from data set to visuals. I think it's a great job. On the East Coast here, water scarcity is not something that we really are concerned about, but I know on the West Coast, because we do a lot of our work in agriculture, it's quite a big deal in terms of water rights and water access and things like that. So I really appreciate the work that the USGS is doing on this particular niche.
Yeah, and I have a soft spot for the great work they're doing. My wife actually was fortunate early in her career to have an internship at the USGS, and albeit this was a day where R wasn't quite as readily used as it is now, but it's great to see this group in particular being really modern with their approaches. And again, top-notch narrative, top-notch visualization. So really exciting to see. And I believe we featured this group on previous highlights, so you want to check out the back catalog for some of the excellent work they've been doing in this space previously. So excellent find, Mike. And there are a lot more finds than just those. So again, we invite you to check out the rest of the R Weekly issue at rweekly.org. We, of course, have a direct link to this particular issue in the show notes, but also you want to check the back catalog, but both the issue as well as this humble podcast itself, because we got so many great things to talk about here, so many great things to learn. As you heard, I basically nurse-sniped myself for a new project, hopefully this year, that I can work on with Shiny and Close Read, so we'll see what happens there. But yeah, if you want to see what else is happening, and if you want to be a part of what's happening here in terms of what the readers are going to see every week, we value your contributions. And the best way to do that is, again, head to rweekly.org. You'll see in the top right corner a link to this upcoming issue's draft, where you can send a pull request to tell us about that great new package, that great new visualization, that great new use case of Shiny or AI or other technologies that you can see in this data science community. We'd love to hear it. Again, all marked down all the time. I would stress again what Ihuesia told me years ago, if you can't learn R Markdown in 5 minutes, he would give you $5, and he didn't have to give any money for it. So there you go, folks. And also, we love hearing from you. You can get in touch with us via the contact page in the episode show notes. You can also send us a fun little boost to Live a Modern Podcast app. Those details are in the show notes as well. And you can also get in touch with us on the social medias. I am now on Mastodon these days with @our podcast at podcastindex.social. I am also on Blue Sky as well, where I am at our podcast.bsky.social. I believe that's how to say it. And Mike, where can the listeners find you?
Yes, I am on Blue Sky for the most part these days at mike-thomas.bsky.social. Also on Mastodon a little bit, Mike_Thomas at fosstodon.org. And you can check out what I'm up to on LinkedIn if you search Ketchbrook Analytics, KETCHBROOK. And a bit of a shout out here, self-plug, that we are looking for a DevOps expert. If you are somebody who has expertise in Docker, little Kubernetes, Azure preferred, but it doesn't really matter because we're all spinning up Linux servers at the end of the day, we could use some help managing ours and our clients' Shiny Proxy environments. So any DevOps folks out there, please feel free to reach out.
I'm sure there are many of you out there. So yeah, take up Mike on this tremendous opportunity. I'm still learning the DevOps ropes. We've shared many stories about that in our adventures there. So that's a great plug, Mike. And I'm also on LinkedIn as well. But yeah, we'll add that little call out to the show notes as well if you're interested in pursuing that. Nonetheless, we're going to close up shop here for episode 194 of our Weekly Highlights. Before I go, I want to send a very hearty congratulations to Chris Fisher and the team at Jupiter Broadcasting, who recently had episode 600 of Linux Unplugged. Tremendous achievement, folks. You'll be seeing a boost from me in the coming days. I don't know if we'll ever get there, Mike, but nonetheless, that's a huge number for a podcast of that size. So congrats to them. Well, we'll get to 200 at least, and we'll see what happens after that. All right.
I got no plans to stop.
Well, yeah, me either. Yeah, we'll see what happens, buddy. But nonetheless, we hope you enjoyed episode 194 of our Weekly Highlights, and we'll be back with another episode for 195 next week.